The drill sergeant's laughter echoed across the training ground as 23-year-old Madison Torres stepped out of the transport vehicle at Fort Braxton's elite tactical training facility. Her perfectly styled auburn hair caught the morning sunlight, and her flawless makeup hadn't even smudged during the bumpy ride from the base. The other recruits exchanged glances, some rolling their eyes, others shaking their heads in disbelief. "Looks like someone took a wrong turn on their way to a fashion shoot," muttered Sergeant Williams, the facility's most feared combat instructor. He'd been breaking tough soldiers for 15 years, and this petite woman with her magazine cover looks seemed like she'd crumble at the first sign of real training. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What none of them knew was that in exactly 47 minutes, Madison would use nothing but a standard ballpoint pen to systematically disarm 5 of the facility's most decorated combat instructors, leaving them stunned on the training mat and questioning everything they thought they knew about judging a soldier by her appearance. Madison Torres had always been an anomaly. Growing up in suburban Denver, Colorado, she was the girl who won Homecoming Queen and Valedictorian in the same year, the one who could execute a perfect pirouette in ballet class and then dominate the debate team championships the following weekend. Her parents, both successful attorneys, had mapped out her future: Stanford University, followed by law school, then a partnership in the family firm. But Madison had different plans. The decision to enlist came during her junior year at Stanford, where she was studying international relations with a minor in military history. While her sorority sisters planned spring break trips to Cabo, Madison spent her free time at the campus ROTC building, watching training exercises and studying tactical manuals that most students wouldn't touch. Her academic advisor, Dr. Patricia Hoffman, thought she was going through a phase. "You're throwing away a guaranteed future," Dr. Hoffman had said during their final meeting. "Your family's law firm is prestigious, Madison. You could make a partner by 30. Madison had simply smiled, that same enigmatic smile that would later unnerve her drill instructors. "Some battles can't be fought in courtrooms, Dr. Hoffman." The real catalyst came during a semester abroad in Eastern Europe, where Madison witnessed the aftermath of a devastating conflict. She spent 3 weeks volunteering at refugee camps, helping families who had lost everything to violence and political upheaval. It was there, watching a 10-year-old girl clutch a torn photograph of her missing father, that Madison realized her true calling wasn't in corporate law or courtroom arguments. Her parents were devastated when she announced her decision to enlist immediately after graduation. Her mother, Elena Torres, had built her entire identity around having a daughter who embodied both beauty and brains, someone who could succeed in traditionally male-dominated fields through intelligence and charm rather than physical confrontation. "You're going to ruin your complexion," her mother had said, as if sunburn and calluses were the worst possible outcomes of military service. "And your hair, Madison. Do you know how much we've spent on maintaining your appearance?" Her father was more direct. "This is a mistake that will haunt you for the rest of your life. The military is no place for someone like you." But Madison had already made her choice. She completed basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, where she excelled in every area except one, earning the respect of her peers and instructors. Her fellow recruits nicknamed her Cover Girl after a particularly grueling obstacle course where she emerged looking barely winded while others were caked in mud and gasping for air. The instructors treated her like a liability waiting to happen, someone who would crack under pressure and endanger her unit. The truth was more complex. Madison had been studying martial arts since age 12, starting with traditional karate before moving into more practical disciplines like Krav Maga and tactical combat systems. Her instructor, Master Chen, had run a small dojo in Denver that specialized in training law enforcement and military personnel. Madison was his only civilian student under 18 and certainly the only one who arrived at evening classes still wearing her school uniform and carrying textbooks. "Fighting is not about looking the part," Master Chen had taught her during countless hours of training. "It's about understanding your opponent's expectations and using them against them. When someone underestimates you, that becomes your greatest weapon." Madison had internalized this lesson completely. Throughout basic training, she deliberately maintained her polished appearance, knowing that every assumption her peers made about her capabilities was another advantage she could exploit when it mattered most. She never corrected the drill sergeants who made jokes about her breaking a nail during weapons training, even though she consistently scored in the top 5% on marksmanship tests. Her strategy was methodical and patient. While other recruits tried to prove themselves through displays of aggression or bravado, Madison quietly studied every instructor's fighting style, memorizing their preferred techniques, their physical tells, and, most importantly, their blind spots. She spent late evenings in the training facility's library, reading military combat manuals and tactical guides that even some of the instructors hadn't bothered to study. After graduating from basic training with honors, Madison had specifically requested assignment to Fort Braxton's Advanced Tactical Program. The facility was legendary within military circles for producing some of the most elite combat specialists in the armed forces. It was also notorious for its brutal selection process, where over 60% of candidates washed out within the first month. The program was designed around a simple philosophy: break down every preconceived notion about combat effectiveness, then rebuild each soldier from the ground up using proven battlefield techniques. Students learn to fight with conventional weapons, improvised tools, and, when necessary, nothing but their hands and whatever objects they could find in their immediate environment. Madison's arrival at Fort Braxton had been met with barely concealed skepticism. The facility's commanding officer, Colonel James Richardson, had reviewed her file 3 times before approving her application. Her test scores were exemplary, her physical fitness ratings were well above average, and her psychological evaluations indicated exceptional mental resilience. But Richardson had seen countless promising recruits fail when faced with the program's unique challenges. "She looks like she belongs on a magazine cover, not a battlefield," Richardson had confided to his second-in-command, Major Susan Walsh. "I'm concerned she's going to become a distraction for the other students." Major Walsh, herself a veteran of 3 combat deployments, had disagreed. "Her file suggests otherwise, sir. Sometimes the most effective soldiers are the ones nobody sees coming." The first week of training had been a careful dance of evaluation and positioning. Madison's fellow students, 12 men and 3 other women, had initially treated her with a mixture of protective concern and dismissive amusement. The men assumed she would need help carrying equipment or understanding complex tactical concepts. The women seemed divided between viewing her as competition and seeing her as someone who would inevitably make them all look bad by association. The instructors were more direct in their skepticism. Sergeant Williams, who had earned 3 Purple Hearts during deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, made no attempt to hide his doubts about Madison's suitability for the program. "Combat isn't a beauty pageant, Torres," he had announced during the first day's introductory briefing. "When bullets start flying and people start dying, your opponents aren't going to care how pretty you look. They're going to try to kill you, and if you're not prepared for that reality, you're going to get yourself and your teammates killed." Madison had nodded respectfully and said nothing, even though she could have recited statistics about female combat effectiveness that would have challenged every assumption underlying Williams' statement. Instead, she focused on observing, learning, and preparing for the moment when she would need to prove that appearances could be the most dangerous deception of all. That moment was about to arrive sooner than anyone expected. The second week of training introduced close-quarters combat scenarios, and Madison found herself paired with Derek Sullivan, a former college linebacker from Texas who stood 6'4" and weighed 230 pounds. Sullivan had been watching Madison since her arrival, clearly expecting her to request a different partner or ask for modified training requirements. "You sure you want to do this, Princess?" Sullivan asked as they faced each other on the padded training mat. His tone wasn't malicious, but it carried the assumption that she would eventually need his protection rather than being able to hold her own. Madison adjusted the standard-issue training gloves and checked her bootlaces with deliberate precision. "I'm here for the same reason you are, Sullivan." The exercise was straightforward. Each pair would engage in controlled combat scenarios using various improvised weapons. The goal wasn't to injure your partner, but to demonstrate tactical superiority through technique, positioning, and creative problem-solving. Each round would introduce different constraints and available tools. Sergeant Williams called the first scenario suburban kitchen environment. Available items: wooden spoons, dish towels, salt shakers, and one ballpoint pen per person. Madison picked up her assigned pen, a standard blue Bic, and tested its weight and balance. The other students grabbed multiple items, loading themselves down with potential weapons. Madison took only the pen. Sullivan collected a wooden spoon, 2 dish towels, and his pen, clearly planning to overwhelm her with multiple attack vectors. He moved to the center of the mat with the confidence of someone who had never lost a physical confrontation. The whistle blew. Sullivan lunged forward, swinging the wooden spoon toward Madison's shoulder while attempting to entangle her legs with one of the towels. It was a sound tactical approach. Control distance, limit mobility, then overwhelm with superior strength. Madison wasn't most opponents. She sidestepped the spoon strike by exactly 2 inches, just enough to avoid contact while staying close enough to exploit Sullivan's forward momentum. As his weight shifted toward his extended arm, Madison stepped inside his guard and drove the pen's tip toward the nerve cluster just below his armpit. The pen never made contact. These were controlled exercises, but Sullivan felt the precise pressure point and immediately understood that he had been completely outmaneuvered. "Hold," Sergeant Williams called, his voice carrying a note of surprise. The entire exercise lasted less than 4 seconds. Madison stepped back, still holding the pen in a defensive position, and offered Sullivan her hand to help him up. He stared at her for a moment, then accepted the assistance with a bemused shake of his head. "How did you—" Sullivan began, then stopped himself. That was incredible. The other training pairs had paused their exercises to watch, and Madison could feel the shift in the room's energy. The dismissive glances were being replaced by careful evaluation, and several instructors were taking notes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "Reset for round 2, Williams announced, but his tone had changed. Office environment. Available items: staplers, computer keyboards, coffee mugs, and writing implements. This time, Madison's opponent was Lisa Chen, a former police officer from Sacramento who specialized in crowd control and riot suppression. Chen was known for her methodical approach to combat and her ability to anticipate her opponent's tactics. Chen selected a stapler and a coffee mug, positioning herself near the designated desk area to use the furniture as cover. Madison again chose only a pen, this one a black felt tip marker. The whistle sounded. Chen immediately threw the coffee mug as a distraction while moving to flank Madison's position. It was a textbook maneuver designed to split her opponent's attention and create an opening for the stapler strike. Madison caught the mug without looking at it, her eyes never leaving Chen's movement pattern. As Chen committed to the flanking maneuver, Madison used the desk's corner to pivot and redirect her own momentum, positioning herself behind Chen's guard in a single fluid motion. The felt-tip pen stopped just short of the pressure point at the base of Chen's skull, held in a grip that could have delivered incapacitating force if this had been a real combat situation. "Hold," Williams's voice was tight with concentration. "Time, 3.7 seconds. The training room had gone completely quiet. Madison helped Chen to her feet, and this time, the other woman's expression showed genuine respect rather than surprised confusion. "That pivot move," Chen said quietly. "I've never seen anything like it. Where did you learn that?" "Master Chen in Denver," Madison replied simply. "He taught me that every piece of furniture is a potential weapon or shield, depending on how you use it." Major Walsh, who had been observing from the elevated platform, made her way down to the training floor. She picked up one of the discarded pens and examined it carefully, as if trying to understand how such an ordinary object could become so effective in the right hands. "Torres," Walsh said, "I want you to demonstrate that technique again, but this time against Instructor Martinez." Staff Sergeant Roberto Martinez was the facility's hand-to-hand combat specialist, a compact, muscular man who had trained with special forces units in 3 different countries. He stepped onto the mat with the easy confidence of someone who had faced hundreds of opponents and never been defeated by a trainee. "Ma'am," Martinez said to Major Walsh, "are you sure about this? I don't want to accidentally injure the student." Walsh's expression didn't change. "I'm sure, Martinez." Torres, same scenario, office environment. Madison nodded and selected another pen, this one a red ballpoint. Martinez chose a stapler, a keyboard, and a coffee mug, then positioned himself in what appeared to be a defensive stance but was actually a carefully disguised attack formation. The whistle blew. Martinez exploded forward with professional speed, the keyboard held like a shield while the stapler moved in a precise strike toward Madison's solar plexus. His footwork was flawless, his timing perfect, and his technique would have overwhelmed any normal opponent within the first 2 seconds. Madison disappeared. That was the only way the watching students could describe what happened. One moment she was directly in front of Martinez's advance, the next she was somehow beside and slightly behind him, the pen positioned against his carotid artery with surgical precision. Martinez froze, his eyes wide with shock. In 15 years of combat training, no one had ever moved that quickly or that efficiently against his attack pattern. "Hold," Major Walsh called, her voice carefully controlled. "Time, 2.9 seconds." The training room erupted in whispers and stunned comments. Martinez straightened slowly, his expression showing a mixture of professional admiration and complete bewilderment. "Torres," he said, extending his hand, "that was the most impressive piece of tactical movement I've ever seen from a trainee. Hell, from most instructors." Madison shook his hand respectfully. "Thank you, Sergeant. Your attack pattern was textbook perfect. I just used your momentum against you." Major Walsh stepped forward, and the room fell silent again. "Torres, tomorrow morning you'll be participating in our advanced evaluation exercise. It's normally reserved for students in their final week, but I think you're ready for a more comprehensive test." She paused, looking around the room at the other students and instructors. "The exercise will involve 5 of our senior combat instructors in simultaneous engagement scenarios. You'll have access to standard classroom materials only." Madison felt her pulse quicken slightly, but kept her expression calm. "Yes, ma'am. What time should I report?" 0800, Gymnasium 3. Walsh turned to address the room. "Everyone else will observe and take notes. This will be a learning exercise for all of us." As the training session concluded and the students filed out of the facility, Madison could hear fragments of conversations about what they had witnessed. Some were analytical, trying to understand the technique she had demonstrated. Others were simply expressions of amazement at the speed and precision of her movements. Derek Sullivan approached her as they reached the barracks area. "Madison," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I owe you an apology. I made assumptions based on stupid prejudices." "No apology necessary," Madison replied. "Everyone makes initial judgments. What matters is how quickly you adjust them when presented with new information." Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. "Tomorrow's evaluation, are you nervous?" Madison considered the question seriously. "Not nervous, excited. This is what I trained for." As she prepared for what would become the most talked-about demonstration in Fort Braxton's history, Madison reflected on Master Chen's final lesson before she had left for military service. "The greatest victories are won before the first strike is thrown. When your opponents underestimate you, they have already defeated themselves." Tomorrow, 5 of the military's most skilled combat instructors would discover just how dangerous that underestimation could be. At 07:45 hours, Madison stood outside Gymnasium 3, adjusting her standard-issue uniform and running through mental preparation exercises Master Chen had taught her years ago. The morning air was crisp, and she could hear voices from inside the building, more voices than she had expected. When she entered the gymnasium, Madison discovered that Major Walsh's definition of "everyone else will observe" was more comprehensive than she had anticipated. The bleachers were filled with students from 3 different training programs, several officers she didn't recognize, and what appeared to be visiting military personnel from other installations. A video camera crew was setting up equipment in one corner, suggesting this evaluation would be documented for training purposes. Colonel Richardson stood near the center of the gymnasium floor, reviewing a clipboard of notes. When he spotted Madison, he gestured for her to approach. "Torres, I want to be clear about what's happening here," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life-and-death decisions. "This isn't a standard evaluation. Based on yesterday's demonstration, we've modified the exercise to better assess your capabilities." Madison nodded, keeping her expression neutral despite her curiosity about the modifications. Richardson continued, "You'll face 5 instructors in sequence, not simultaneously as originally planned. Each engagement will present different environmental constraints and available resources. The scenarios are designed to replicate real-world situations where conventional weapons aren't available." He gestured toward a table near the center of the gym where various everyday objects were arranged. Pens, pencils, notebooks, a calculator, reading glasses, a water bottle, paper clips, and a small desk lamp. "You may select one item before each engagement," Richardson explained. "Your opponents will have access to standard defensive equipment, protective padding, training knives, and simulated firearms. The objective is simple: neutralize each opponent and secure their designated position." Madison studied the available items, noting their weight, durability, and potential applications. "Rules of engagement, sir. Controlled contact only, no permanent injuries. Each instructor will signal surrender when they recognize they've been tactically defeated." Richardson paused, glancing toward the bleachers. "Torres, I want you to understand that what you demonstrated yesterday has attracted attention from outside this facility. There are observers here today who evaluate soldiers for specialized assignments." The implications were clear. This wasn't just about passing an advanced training course. It was an audition for opportunities she hadn't even known existed. Major Walsh approached the 5 instructors who would serve as Madison's opponents. She recognized Sergeant Williams and Staff Sergeant Martinez from previous encounters, but the other 3 were new to her. "Torres, meet Master Sergeant Patricia Collins, Urban Warfare Specialist," Walsh began. Collins was a tall, rangy woman with calloused hands and the kind of focused intensity that came from multiple combat deployments. "Sergeant First Class Michael Thompson, Psychological Operations and Interrogation Resistance." Thompson was younger than the others, with sharp, calculating eyes that seemed to be constantly assessing potential vulnerabilities. And Chief Warrant Officer David Kim, Explosives and Demolitions Expert. Kim was compact and methodical, the type of soldier who approached every problem with systematic precision. Each instructor stepped forward to shake Madison's hand, a gesture that felt more like a final courtesy before battle than a friendly greeting.
First scenario, Major Walsh announced to the assembled crowd. Urban environment, abandoned office building. The opponent has the tactical advantage of elevated position and cover. Available tools, standard office supplies. Madison approached the equipment table and selected a ballpoint pen, the same type she had used in previous demonstrations. Sergeant Williams positioned himself behind a makeshift barricade constructed from gym mats and equipment boxes, simulating an office worker's desk and filing cabinet setup. "Begin when ready," Walsh called. Williams immediately established a defensive perimeter, using his elevated position to maintain visual control of all approach angles. He held a training knife in a reverse grip, positioned to strike at anyone who attempted to breach his cover. Madison moved with deliberate slowness, appearing to study Williams's position while actually mapping the gymnasium's acoustics and lighting conditions. She dropped low and began what looked like a cautious approach toward the left side of Williams's barricade. The movement was a complete misdirection. While Williams adjusted his position to track her apparent approach, Madison used the gymnasium's concrete wall to bounce a precisely thrown pen at an angle that would have been impossible with direct targeting. The pen struck a specific point on the equipment box supporting Williams's cover, destabilizing his position and forcing him to shift his balance. In that moment of adjustment, Madison was already in motion, having used the pen throw as cover for a sprint that brought her behind Williams's position. By the time he realized the true direction of her attack, she was already in control of his weapon hand and applying pressure to a nerve cluster that made his grip involuntarily release. "Surrender!" Williams called, his voice carrying amazement rather than defeat. Time, 4.2 seconds. The crowd's reaction was immediate and audible. Gasps, whispered comments, and what sounded like applause that was quickly suppressed by military protocol. "Second scenario," Walsh announced after a brief pause. "Vehicle checkpoint. Suspect approaching on foot. Multiple civilians in the background require protection." Staff Sergeant Martinez took his position behind a simulated vehicle, represented by parallel gym mats. Cardboard cutouts positioned around the area represented civilians who couldn't be endangered during the engagement. Madison selected a pencil from the available items, testing its balance and structural integrity. Martinez was armed with a simulated pistol and had tactical cover, but was constrained by the civilian positions just as Madison was. "Begin." Martinez immediately called out standard checkpoint procedures, demanding Madison identify herself and submit to search protocols. His positioning was textbook correct, maintaining both cover and clear sight lines while protecting the civilian positions. Madison responded by appearing to comply with the checkpoint protocols, moving slowly with her hands partially visible while maintaining what seemed like respectful distance from the civilians. What Martinez couldn't see was that Madison was using the civilian positions to mask a specific movement pattern, one that would allow her to approach from an angle that eliminated his cover advantage without endangering any of the simulated bystanders. The pencil left her hand with surgical precision, striking the simulated weapon at exactly the right angle to knock it from Martinez's grip while she simultaneously moved to a position that made retrieval impossible. Martinez found himself weaponless and tactically compromised before he fully understood how she had maneuvered through the civilian obstacle course. "Surrender." Time, 6.7 seconds. The third engagement pitted Madison against Master Sergeant Collins in a scenario designed around close-quarters combat in confined spaces. Collins was renowned for her ability to fight effectively in urban environments where movement was restricted and conventional tactics were ineffective. Madison selected the small desk lamp, its weighted base and cord offering multiple tactical applications. Collins positioned herself in a simulated hallway created by equipment barriers, armed with both a training knife and simulated flashbang grenades. The engagement began with Collins attempting to control the confined space through aggressive positioning and the threat of the flashbangs. It was a sound strategy against opponents who relied on visual targeting and mobility. Madison's response was to use the desk lamp's electrical cord as both a distraction and a control mechanism, creating the illusion of an electrical hazard while actually using the lamp's weight and reach to neutralize Collins's weapons from outside her effective combat range. "Surrender." Time, 8.1 seconds. The third engagement pitted Madison against Master Sergeant Collins in a scenario designed around close-quarters combat in confined spaces. Collins was renowned for her ability to fight effectively in urban environments where movement was restricted and conventional tactics were ineffective. Madison selected the small desk lamp, its weighted base and cord offering multiple tactical applications. Collins positioned herself in a simulated hallway created by equipment barriers, armed with both a training knife and simulated flashbang grenades. The engagement began with Collins attempting to control the confined space through aggressive positioning and the threat of the flashbangs. It was a sound strategy against opponents who relied on visual targeting and mobility. Madison's response was to use the desk lamp's electrical cord as both a distraction and a control mechanism, creating the illusion of an electrical hazard while actually using the lamp's weight and reach to neutralize Collins's weapons from outside her effective combat range. "Surrender." Time, 8.1 seconds. Sergeant First Class Thompson's scenario involved psychological pressure and interrogation resistance, designed to test Madison's ability to maintain tactical focus while under mental stress. Thompson began with verbal intimidation techniques while maintaining a defensive position that forced Madison to approach through a narrow corridor.
Madison countered by using the water bottle she had selected to create acoustic diversions that masked her actual position, while Thompson's psychological tactics revealed his precise location and tactical limitations. Surrender. Time, 5.4 seconds. The final engagement with Chief Warrant Officer Kim was the most complex, involving multiple simulated explosive devices that Madison had to neutralize while simultaneously dealing with Kim's defensive position. Madison selected the calculator, using its electronic components to simulate interference with the explosive devices while employing advanced movement techniques that allowed her to approach Kim's position from multiple angles simultaneously. Surrender. Time, 7.2 seconds. As the last engagement concluded, the gymnasium fell into complete silence. Madison stood in the center of the floor, breathing normally, with no visible signs of exertion or stress. Around her, 5 of Fort Braxton's most skilled combat instructors were slowly getting to their feet, each wearing expressions of professional respect mixed with complete bewilderment. Colonel Richardson stepped forward, his clipboard forgotten in his hand. "Torres," he said, his voice carrying a note of awe that he didn't attempt to conceal. "In 30 years of military service, I have never witnessed anything like what just happened here." He looked around the silent gymnasium, taking in the stunned faces of students and observers alike. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have just watched a demonstration of tactical excellence that will become required viewing for advanced combat training programs across all branches of the military." Madison straightened to attention. "Thank you, sir." Richardson shook his head slowly. "Torres, I think we need to have a very different conversation about your future in the military." 3 hours after the demonstration, Madison found herself in Colonel Richardson's private office, facing a conference table filled with personnel she had never seen before. The nameplates revealed their identities: General Patricia Hawkins from Special Operations Command, Colonel Marcus Webb from Intelligence Division, and Dr. Sarah Chen from the Department of Defense's Advanced Combat Research Unit. Richardson gestured for Madison to take the seat at the head of the table. "Torres, what you demonstrated today has implications that extend far beyond this training facility. These officers are here to discuss opportunities that don't appear in standard career counseling materials." General Hawkins leaned forward, her steel-gray eyes studying Madison with the intensity of someone accustomed to making decisions that affect national security. "Lieutenant Torres, your tactical innovations demonstrate capabilities we've been trying to develop through technology and specialized equipment. You've achieved the same results using everyday objects and unconventional thinking." "Ma'am, I was simply applying principles my instructor taught me about adapting to available resources," Madison replied, maintaining military bearing despite her curiosity about where this conversation was heading. Colonel Webb opened a classified folder and spread several photographs across the table. They showed urban environments, government buildings, and what appeared to be surveillance footage from various international locations. "These represent situations where traditional military approaches are inadequate," Webb explained. "Diplomatic facilities where weapons aren't permitted, urban environments where conventional tactics would endanger civilians, and intelligence operations where operatives must function without standard equipment." Dr. Chen activated a tablet and projected holographic displays that showed tactical scenarios Madison had never encountered in training. "We've been developing programs to address these challenges, but they've required extensive technological support and months of specialized training. Your demonstration suggests there might be more efficient approaches." Madison studied the projected scenarios, recognizing patterns and potential solutions almost immediately. Her mind automatically began analyzing sightlines, available materials, and tactical opportunities that weren't immediately obvious. "Lieutenant," General Hawkins continued, "we're prepared to offer you an assignment to a classified program that would utilize your unique skill set. The work would involve situations where traditional military solutions aren't viable, but where tactical problems still require resolution. Richardson consulted his notes. Torres, before you respond, you should understand that accepting this assignment would mean leaving conventional military career tracks. No traditional promotions, no standard postings, and no ability to discuss your work with anyone outside the program. Madison felt a familiar sensation, the same clarity that had guided her decision to leave law school, to enlist, and to request assignment to Fort Braxton. What type of situations would I be addressing? Colonel Webb gestured toward the projected scenarios. Diplomatic security where conventional protection would be inappropriate. Intelligence operations requiring tactical support without traditional resources. Urban situations where minimal force application could prevent larger conflicts. Counterterrorism scenarios where traditional approaches might escalate rather than resolve situations. Research and development of new tactical methodologies that could be taught to other operatives. General Hawkins stood and walked to the office's window, which overlooked the training grounds where Madison had first arrived just weeks ago. Torres, what you demonstrated today suggests you understand combat in ways that our most advanced theoretical models are still trying to quantify. We need people who can think beyond conventional parameters. Madison considered the implications. Ma'am, would this assignment involve working alone or as part of a team?
Both, Webb replied. Some situations require individual operatives who can function independently. Others involve supporting teams that need tactical expertise beyond their training scope. Dr. Chen pulled up another series of projections showing training facilities Madison didn't recognize. You would also be involved in developing new training protocols. What you accomplished with everyday objects could revolutionize how we prepare operatives for unconventional environments. The program operates under joint command, General Hawkins explained, returning to her seat. Army, Navy, Air Force, and civilian agencies contribute personnel and resources. Your military rank would continue to advance, but through channels that don't appear in standard personnel databases. Madison realized they were describing a level of military service she had never imagined existed. Operations that required tactical excellence but couldn't be accomplished through conventional military structures. How soon would this assignment begin? She asked. Richardson consulted his calendar. If you accept, transport would be arranged within 72 hours. Initial orientation would take place at a facility in Nevada, followed by assignment to your first operational team. Colonel Webb leaned back in his chair. Torres, I want to be completely transparent about what this involves. The work is challenging in ways that conventional military service isn't. You would face situations where failure could have international implications, where your decisions might affect diplomatic relationships, and where you couldn't rely on standard backup or support systems. You would also be working with the most advanced tactical training available anywhere in the world, Dr. Chen added. Technology, methodology, and strategic thinking that's years ahead of anything currently available to conventional forces. Madison thought about Master Chen's teachings, about her parents' expectations, and about the refugee camp where she had first understood her true calling. All of those experiences had led to this moment, to an opportunity that aligned perfectly with her desire to protect people through unconventional means. General Hawkins, Madison said, would this work involve protecting people who can't protect themselves? Hawkins smiled for the first time during the meeting. That's exactly what it involves, Lieutenant. Protecting people, preventing conflicts, and resolving situations that could otherwise escalate into much larger problems. Then I accept the assignment. Richardson nodded with satisfaction. I thought you would. Your transfer orders will be processed today, and you'll receive detailed briefing materials this evening. Colonel Webb leaned back in his chair. Torres, I want to be completely transparent about what this involves. The work is challenging in ways that conventional military service isn't. You would face situations where failure could have international implications, where your decisions might affect diplomatic relationships, and where you couldn't rely on standard backup or support systems. You would also be working with the most advanced tactical training available anywhere in the world, Dr. Chen added. Technology, methodology, and strategic thinking that's years ahead of anything currently available to conventional forces. Madison thought about Master Chen's teachings, about her parents' expectations, and about the refugee camp where she had first understood her true calling. All of those experiences had led to this moment, to an opportunity that aligned perfectly with her desire to protect people through unconventional means. General Hawkins, Madison said, would this work involve protecting people who can't protect themselves? Hawkins smiled for the first time during the meeting. That's exactly what it involves, Lieutenant. Protecting people, preventing conflicts, and resolving situations that could otherwise escalate into much larger problems. Then I accept the assignment. Richardson nodded with satisfaction. I thought you would. Your transfer orders will be processed today, and you'll receive detailed briefing materials this evening. Colonel Webb gathered the photographs and classified materials. Torres, one final consideration. Your family will be told you've been assigned to a classified training program with limited communication privileges. They won't be able to contact you directly, but periodic updates will be provided to ensure they know you're safe. Madison understood the implications. Her parents would worry, but they would also have to accept that their daughter had chosen a path they couldn't fully understand or control. Dr. Chen powered down her projection equipment. Lieutenant, your tactical innovations will be studied and potentially incorporated into training programs across multiple agencies. Your work will impact how we prepare the next generation of operatives for challenges we're just beginning to understand. As the meeting concluded, Madison realized that her journey from law school student to unconventional warfare specialist had reached a new phase. The skills that had made her an anomaly at Fort Braxton would become the foundation for work that most people would never know existed. General Hawkins shook Madison's hand as the group prepared to leave. Torres, what you demonstrated today wasn't just tactical excellence. It was proof that the most effective solutions often come from thinking beyond conventional limitations. Ma'am, Madison replied, my instructor always said that the best victories are won by people who understand that rules are just starting points for creative thinking. Hawkins laughed. I think you're going to fit in perfectly with this program. That evening, Madison packed her personal belongings and wrote carefully worded letters to her parents and Master Chen, explaining that she had been selected for specialized training that would limit communication, but represented exactly the type of service she had always intended to pursue. As she prepared for sleep on her final night at Fort Braxton, Madison reflected on the rapid transformation of her military career. In just weeks, she had gone from being dismissed as unsuitable for combat to being recruited for some of the most challenging tactical work the military had to offer. The demonstration with 5 instructors and a ballpoint pen was just the beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and the chance to protect people in ways that conventional military service couldn't provide. Master Chen had been right about using expectations as weapons. Madison's appearance and background had created assumptions that became tactical advantages. And now those same qualities would allow her to operate in environments where traditional soldiers would be immediately identified and neutralized. She fell asleep knowing that her real work was just beginning. 18 months later, Madison stood on the observation deck of the U.S. Embassy in Prague, watching the sun set over a city where she had just completed her most challenging assignment yet. The mission had involved protecting an international climate summit from nothing more than conference room supplies and her ability to blend seamlessly into diplomatic crowds. Her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Colonel Webb. Outstanding work in Prague. New assignment briefing tomorrow, 0800 hours, Langley. Madison smiled, remembering how Sergeant Williams had laughed at the idea of her surviving combat situations. The past year and a half had taken her to 17 countries, through situations that would have been impossible for conventional military units to handle, and she had never once needed anything more sophisticated than everyday objects and tactical thinking. The specialized program had exceeded every expectation she had formed during that meeting in Colonel Richardson's office. Her team included former Special Forces operatives, intelligence analysts with advanced degrees in psychology and engineering, and technology specialists who developed equipment she never actually needed to use. Her assignment record read like a thriller novel, preventing an assassination attempt in Geneva using only a hotel pen and room service cart, Neutralizing a bomb threat in Tokyo with conference materials and precise understanding of crowd psychology. Resolving a hostage situation in Berlin through tactical innovation that avoided any casualties on either side. Each mission had reinforced Master Chen's fundamental teaching about using opponents' expectations against them. Madison's appearance and background continue to provide perfect cover for operations in environments where traditional operatives would be immediately identified as threats. The phone rang again, this time with a call from her parents. Communication restrictions had been relaxed after her first year, though she still couldn't discuss operational details. "Madison, honey, your father and I just wanted to check in." Her mother's voice carried the mixture of pride and worry that had become familiar since Madison's assignment to classified work. "I'm doing well, Mom. The work is challenging and exactly what I hoped it would be." Her father took the phone. "We got another letter from the military yesterday saying you've received commendations for outstanding service. We're proud of you, even though we still don't understand what you're actually doing." Madison looked out over Prague's ancient architecture, thinking about the hundreds of people who were safe tonight because of work they would never know had happened. "Dad, remember when you said I was throwing away a guaranteed future by enlisting?" "I do, and I was wrong about that. The future I found was better than anything I could have guaranteed myself. I'm protecting people in ways that matter, using skills I never could have developed in a courtroom." Her mother's voice returned. "Are you happy, sweetheart? Really happy?" Madison considered the question seriously. The work was demanding, often dangerous, and required constant adaptation to new challenges. But every successful mission brought the satisfaction of knowing she had prevented larger conflicts, protected innocent people, and solved problems that no one else could have addressed. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, Mom." After ending the call, Madison's secure phone displayed another message, this one from an unexpected source, Master Chen. "Saw the news about the Prague conference proceeding without incident. Proud of how you're using the lessons. Remember, the greatest victories are the ones no one knows happened." Madison typed back, "Thank you, Sifu. Your teachings saved more lives than you'll ever know." His response came immediately. "Lives saved by your choices and skills. I just taught you to see clearly." The next morning, Madison reported to the secure conference room at Langley, where Colonel Webb was waiting with Dr. Chen and a new face, Admiral Rebecca Morrison, whose reputation in naval intelligence was legendary. "Torres," Webb began, "your mission record has attracted attention from the highest levels of government. Admiral Morrison has a proposition that represents a significant expansion of your current role." Admiral Morrison activated a holographic display showing a global map with dozens of highlighted locations. "Lieutenant, we're establishing a new rapid response unit for international crisis situations. Small teams of specialists who can deploy anywhere in the world within 12 hours and resolve problems before they escalate into larger conflicts." Dr. Chen consulted her tablet. "Your success rate and operational innovations make you the ideal candidate to lead the program's Tactical Development Division. You would be responsible for training new operatives and developing methodologies for unconventional problem-solving." Madison studied the global map, recognizing several locations where recent international tensions could have benefited from exactly the type of intervention they were describing. "Admiral, what would be the scope of authority for these rapid response teams?" Morrison pulled up classified briefing materials. "Direct authorization from the Joint Chiefs for situations involving international security threats. You would have resources from multiple agencies and the authority to make tactical decisions without waiting for traditional command approval." Webb leaned forward. "Torres, this represents the evolution of everything you've been doing. Instead of responding to crises after they develop, you would be positioned to prevent them from developing in the first place."
The training facility would be located in Colorado, Dr. Chen added, about 2 hours from where you grew up. Your family could visit, though operational details would remain classified. Madison felt a familiar sense of alignment, the same clarity that had guided every major decision in her journey from law school to this moment. The opportunity represented the perfect synthesis of her skills, her desire to protect people, and her understanding that the most effective solutions often required thinking beyond conventional approaches. "I accept the assignment," she said without hesitation. Admiral Morrison smiled. "I hoped you would. Your first class of trainees reports in 6 weeks. They're all exceptional soldiers who have been selected for unconventional thinking and tactical innovation." Webb gathered his materials. "Torres, you've proven that the most sophisticated problems can be solved with the right combination of intelligence, training, and creative thinking. Now you'll be teaching others to do the same." Dr. Chen powered down her equipment. "Your story is already being studied in military academies, though obviously without operational details. You've changed how we think about tactical training and resource utilization." 6 months later, Madison stood in front of her first training class at the Colorado facility, looking at 20 soldiers from various branches who had been selected for the same qualities that had brought her to this point: exceptional tactical thinking, ability to function under pressure, and willingness to challenge conventional approaches to problem solving. "Welcome to Advanced Unconventional Tactics Training," she began, picking up a standard ballpoint pen from the lecture podium. "Over the next 12 weeks, you'll learn that the most effective weapons are often the ones your opponents never see coming." She looked around the room at faces that showed mixtures of curiosity, skepticism, and determination. "You've all been selected because you've demonstrated the ability to think beyond standard military doctrine. Now you'll learn to turn that thinking into tactical advantages that can resolve conflicts without traditional military engagement." A young sergeant in the front row raised her hand. "Ma'am, is it true you once disarmed 5 instructors using only a pen?" Madison smiled, remembering her own skepticism when Master Chen had first described seemingly impossible tactical concepts. "Sergeant, by the time you complete this program, that will seem like the simplest possible example of what's achievable when you understand that every environment contains everything you need to succeed. You just have to learn to see it clearly." She placed the pen back on the podium and looked out the window toward the mountains where she had grown up, knowing that her journey from dismissed recruit to elite tactical trainer had been guided by a simple principle: the most powerful victories are won by people who refuse to accept limitations that others consider absolute. The skeptical laughter that had once echoed across Fort Braxton's training ground had been replaced by respectful attention from soldiers who understood they were about to learn skills that would redefine their understanding of what was possible in military service. Madison began her first lesson the same way Master Chen had begun hers years ago. Fighting is not about looking the part. It's about understanding your environment, your resources, and your opponent's expectations. When you master those 3 elements, you become unstoppable. Outside the Colorado training facility, snow began to fall on mountains that had watched Madison Torres transformed from a law student with unconventional dreams into a soldier who proved that the most dangerous assumptions are the ones people make about what others can't accomplish. The pen on her podium caught the light, a simple reminder that extraordinary results often come from ordinary tools in the hands of someone who refuses to be limited by what others consider possible. 2 years into running the Advanced Unconventional Tactics Training Program, Madison received an emergency briefing that would test everything she had built. The secure video conference connected her with officials from the Pentagon, CIA, and State Department, their faces grim with the weight of an escalating international crisis. Major Torres, Secretary of Defense Patricia Williams began, using Madison's newly promoted rank, "We have a situation in Eastern Europe that requires immediate intervention. A diplomatic convoy has been taken hostage by a separatist group, and conventional rescue operations are impossible due to the political sensitivity and urban environment." The screen displayed satellite imagery of a historic city center where narrow medieval streets made traditional military approaches impossible. "The hostages include the daughter of the German chancellor and the son of the French defense minister, along with their security details," continued General Morrison. "Any visible military action could destabilize the entire region." CIA Director James Foster leaned into the camera. "The separatists are demanding international recognition and safe passage out of the country. They've positioned themselves in a 14th-century cathedral with multiple civilian tourists trapped inside. Traditional siege tactics would result in casualties we cannot accept.
Madison studied the architectural plans and surveillance footage. The cathedral's ancient stone construction, multiple entry points, and civilian complications created exactly the type of challenge her training program was designed to address. "What's the current situation inside the building?" she asked. 43 hostages total," Foster replied. 12 separatists armed with assault rifles and explosive devices. They've barricaded the main entrances and positioned snipers in the bell tower. Local police have cordoned off the area, but any approach triggers immediate threats against the hostages. Secretary Williams consulted her briefing materials. "Major, we need someone who can enter that building undetected, neutralize the threat without alerting the perpetrators, and extract the hostages without international incident. Your operational record suggests you're the only person we have who might be able to accomplish this." Madison examined the cathedral's layout, noting service entrances, architectural features, and potential tactical advantages that weren't immediately obvious. What resources would be available on site? "Tourist materials, cathedral maintenance supplies, and whatever you can carry in without arousing suspicion," General Morrison explained. "You would enter as a lost tourist, seeking shelter, then assess and act based on real-time conditions." Director Foster activated additional surveillance feeds showing the exterior of the cathedral. "The separatists are monitoring all official channels and have threatened to execute hostages if they detect any military presence. This operation must appear completely civilian until the moment of resolution." Madison understood the implications. This wasn't just a rescue mission, it was a test of whether unconventional tactics could resolve a crisis that traditional military approaches couldn't touch. "I'll need my operational partner," Madison said, referring to Captain Sarah Mitchell, a former Army Ranger who had become her most trusted colleague in complex missions. "Already en route to the staging area," Secretary Williams confirmed. "You have 18 hours before the separatists' deadline expires." 12 hours later, Madison walked through the narrow cobblestone streets of the historic city center, dressed as a graduate student conducting research on medieval architecture. Her backpack contained only tourist guidebooks, a digital camera, sketch pads, and a selection of art supplies that would pass any casual inspection. Captain Mitchell positioned herself 2 blocks away as a freelance journalist covering the developing story, equipped with professional camera equipment and press credentials that would allow her to monitor police communications and coordinate with extraction teams. Madison approached the cathedral's side entrance, where nervous guards were still allowing small groups of tourists to enter despite the ongoing situation. The separatist strategy relied on maintaining an appearance of normalcy while controlling the building's interior. "Excuse me," Madison said, in accented English, "I'm researching Gothic architecture for my dissertation. Is it still possible to visit the nave and transept areas?" The guard, clearly stressed by the day's events, barely glanced at her student identification. "Tourist areas only. No access to restricted sections." Madison nodded gratefully and entered the cathedral, immediately assessing the acoustic properties, lighting conditions, and crowd movements that would affect any tactical action. The separatists had positioned themselves strategically throughout the building, but their focus was on monitoring official entrances and maintaining control of the main hostage group. Using her art supplies as cover for detailed observation, Madison sketched architectural features while actually mapping guard positions, weapon locations, and civilian distribution patterns. The separatists' confidence in their tactical superiority had created predictable blind spots but could be exploited. Over the next hour, Madison moved through the cathedral as an enthusiastic architecture student, asking innocent questions about structural features while gathering intelligence on the separatists' communications, shift patterns, and psychological state. The breakthrough came when she observed the lead separatist, a man named Victor, who was clearly educated and articulate, but showing signs of stress-induced tunnel vision. His tactical decisions were sound but inflexible, suggesting he would react predictably to specific types of pressure. Madison activated her concealed communication device and transmitted a coded message to Captain Mitchell. Target acquisition complete, initiating Phase 1. Using techniques perfected during her training years, Madison began creating carefully orchestrated distractions that would gradually shift the separatists' attention away from critical positions. A dropped pencil that rolled into a specific acoustic zone, tourist questions that required guards to turn away from their posts, and art supply arrangements that created visual markers for her operational plan. The first separatist was neutralized when Madison used a combination of architectural knowledge and improvised materials to create a silent takedown in the cathedral's confession area. The guard's weapon and communication device were secured without alerting his colleagues. The second and third separatists were isolated and neutralized using the cathedral's complex acoustics to mask their absence from radio check-ins. Madison's art supplies provided both distraction and tactical tools, while her apparent student status allowed her to move freely through areas the separatists considered secure. By the time Victor realized his perimeter was being systematically compromised, Madison had already neutralized 6 of his 12 operatives and repositioned herself with tactical advantage over the main hostage area. The final confrontation occurred in the cathedral's central nave, where Victor held the most valuable hostages at gunpoint while demanding to know how his carefully planned operation had been compromised by someone who appeared to be a harmless graduate student.
"You made the same mistake everyone makes," Madison said, still holding her sketchpad and maintaining her student persona even as she positioned herself for the final tactical sequence. "You assume appearance determines capability." Victor's response was exactly what Madison had anticipated based on her psychological assessment. His demand for explanations and need to understand how he had been outmaneuvered created the momentary distraction necessary for her to complete the operation using nothing more than art supplies and architectural knowledge. 27 minutes after entering the cathedral as a tourist, Madison had neutralized all 12 separatists, secured their weapons and explosives, and coordinated the safe evacuation of all 43 hostages without a single injury. The international media reported the crisis resolution as a successful negotiation by local authorities, with no mention of military intervention or tactical operations. The diplomatic implications were managed through carefully crafted statements about peaceful resolution and cooperation between nations. 3 days later, Madison stood in the White House Situation Room, receiving commendation from officials who understood that her actions had prevented what could have become a major international conflict. "Major Torres," the president said, "your work in this crisis demonstrates capabilities that extend far beyond traditional military service. You've proven that the right combination of intelligence, training, and unconventional thinking can resolve situations that would otherwise require massive military intervention." Secretary Williams presented Madison with classified commendations that would never appear in public records, but represented recognition at the highest levels of government. "Your program has produced operatives who are preventing conflicts around the world using methods that most military strategists still don't fully understand." As Madison returned to Colorado and her training facility, she reflected on how far she had traveled from that first day at Fort Braxton, when Sergeant Williams had laughed at the idea of her surviving combat situations. The skills that had once seemed impossible to explain had become the foundation for preventing international crises through methods that left no trace of military involvement. Her newest class of trainees was waiting when she arrived, 24 soldiers from allied nations who had been selected for the same unconventional thinking that had brought Madison to this point. As she picked up a simple pencil from the lecture podium, she smiled, knowing that each of these soldiers would soon discover capabilities they had never imagined possible. The world was becoming more complex, but Madison Torres had proven that the most sophisticated problems often required the simplest solutions in the hands of people who refused to accept conventional limitations. 5 years later, Colonel Madison Torres stood before the United Nations Security Council in New York, addressing an emergency session about the establishment of a new international peacekeeping protocol. The delegates from 15 nations listened intently as she presented the results of a revolutionary approach to conflict prevention that had changed the landscape of international security.
Honorable delegates, Madison began, consulting the briefing materials that represented years of successful operations across 6 continents. The traditional military intervention model has prevented 12 potential armed conflicts, resolved 47 hostage situations, and neutralized 33 terrorist threats without a single casualty or diplomatic incident. The Russian delegate leaned forward. Colonel Torres, these results seem mathematically impossible. How can military operations achieve 100% success rates while maintaining complete operational secrecy? Madison activated a holographic display showing global crisis points where her trained operatives had intervened over the past 3 years. Ambassador Volkov, the key is understanding that the most effective military action is action that appears to be anything except military action. The Chinese representative consulted her translation device. Colonel, are you suggesting that traditional military approaches are fundamentally flawed? Not flawed, Ambassador Chen, but limited. Conventional military responses are designed for conventional threats. However, most contemporary security challenges occur in environments where conventional responses would create more problems than they solve. She gestured toward the holographic data showing intervention sites across Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America. Urban hostage situations, diplomatic facility threats, economic terrorism, and political assassination attempts require solutions that don't destabilize the regions they're meant to protect. The British delegate studied the classified briefing materials. Colonel Torres, your program claims to have trained operatives who can resolve these situations using minimal resources and no detectable military presence. Can you provide specific examples? Madison consulted her security clearance guidelines. Last month, an operative prevented a bombing at the Geneva Climate Summit using conference materials and crowd psychology techniques. 3 weeks ago, another operative neutralized an assassination attempt in Tokyo during trade negotiations using only items available in a standard hotel gift shop. She paused, allowing the implications to register. In both cases, the targets never knew they had been in danger. The perpetrators were apprehended through coordination with local authorities, and the international events proceeded without disruption. The French delegate raised her hand. Colonel, this methodology sounds like intelligence work rather than military operations. How do you maintain accountability and oversight?
Ambassador Dubois, every operation is conducted under joint international authority with real-time monitoring from multiple agencies, Madison explained. The operatives work within existing legal frameworks and coordinate with local law enforcement to ensure proper jurisdiction and documentation. Secretary General Maria Santos addressed the Assembly. Delegates, Colonel Torres is presenting this protocol for potential adoption as a UN peacekeeping methodology. The proposal would establish multinational teams trained in these unconventional approaches, available for deployment when traditional peacekeeping forces would be inappropriate or ineffective. The German delegate consulted with his advisors. Colonel Torres, what is the selection criteria for operatives capable of this type of work? These abilities seem to require exceptional individuals. Madison smiled, thinking of her current training classes where soldiers from allied nations were discovering capabilities they had never imagined. Ambassador Mueller, the most important qualification is willingness to abandon conventional thinking about what's possible. Physical capabilities and technical skills can be developed, but creative problem-solving cannot be taught to people who refuse to consider unconventional solutions. She activated another display showing training facility data. Currently, we have graduated 437 operatives from 23 countries. Success rates in final evaluations exceed 92%, suggesting that these abilities are more common than previously believed. The Japanese delegates studied the training statistics. Colonel, what type of scenarios do these operatives practice? How do you simulate real-world conditions? Ambassador Tanaka, our training environments replicate actual crisis situations using volunteers from diplomatic communities, local law enforcement, and civilian organizations. Operatives must resolve scenarios using only materials available in those specific environments: airport terminals, university campuses, corporate headquarters, cultural events. She pulled up footage from recent training exercises. Last month, a trainee successfully neutralized a simulated terrorist threat at a mock embassy reception using only cocktail napkins, floral arrangements, and catering supplies. The volunteer terrorists were former Special Forces operatives who had been told to expect conventional tactical responses. The Canadian delegate leaned back in his chair. Colonel Torres, assuming the Security Council approves this protocol, what would be the timeline for implementation? Madison consulted her operational planning materials. Ambassador Foster, we could deploy the first international teams within 6 months. Initial deployment would cover regions where traditional peacekeeping has been consistently challenged by urban environments and political sensitivities. Secretary General Santos addressed the Assembly. Delegates will now hear testimony from officials who have observed these operations firsthand. Over the next hour, Madison listened as representatives from various crisis situations described interventions they had witnessed without understanding the tactical methodologies involved. A German industrialist testified about a factory hostage situation that had been resolved so smoothly he initially thought it was a training exercise. A French diplomat described an assassination attempt that had been prevented during a state dinner without disrupting the event or alerting the intended victim. When the testimony concluded, the Security Council voted unanimously to establish the International Unconventional Peacekeeping Protocol, with Madison designated as the program's first director of operations. 6 months later, Madison stood in her new office at UN headquarters reviewing deployment reports from the first international teams. Her secure phone displayed messages from operatives in 12 countries who were successfully implementing the methodologies she had developed from those first demonstrations with a ballpoint pen at Fort Braxton. A knock on her door interrupted her review. Dr. Sarah Chen entered with a tablet displaying global crisis statistics. Colonel Torres, I wanted to share the 6-month assessment data. International conflict incidents requiring military intervention have decreased by 37% in regions where our teams are positioned. Madison studied the numbers, recognizing the broader implications. Dr. Chen, these results suggest we're actually preventing conflicts from developing, rather than just responding to them more effectively. Exactly, Dr. Chen replied. When potential aggressors understand that their conventional tactical advantages may not be reliable, they're more likely to pursue diplomatic solutions. Your methodology is changing the strategic calculations that lead to violence. Madison's personal phone rang with a call from Master Chen, now 83 and still teaching at his Denver dojo. Madison, I saw the news coverage of the UN program. I'm proud of how far you've taken the principles we discussed. Sifu, everything I've accomplished came from lessons you taught me in that small dojo. About seeing clearly, understanding opponents' expectations, and using creativity as a tactical advantage. Master Chen's voice carried warmth and satisfaction. Madison, you've proven that individual excellence can transform entire systems when it's applied with wisdom and dedication. The world is safer because you refuse to accept limitations that others considered absolute. After ending the call, Madison walked to her office window overlooking the East River, thinking about the journey that had brought her from law school student to director of international unconventional peacekeeping operations. Her parents called every Sunday now, finally understanding that their daughter had found exactly the type of impactful work they had always hoped she would pursue, even if it wasn't in the legal profession they had envisioned. The latest training class reports showed operatives from 31 countries learning to solve complex tactical problems using everyday objects and unconventional thinking. Each graduated operative represented potential conflicts prevented, lives saved, and international stability maintained through methods that left no trace of military intervention. Madison picked up a simple ballpoint pen from her desk, the same type of pen that had started everything at Fort Braxton years ago. That first demonstration against 5 instructors had been about proving that assumptions could be dangerous limitations. Now, the same principles were being applied to prevent international conflicts and maintain global security. Her secure terminal displayed an incoming mission request from the State Department, a developing crisis in Southeast Asia that required immediate intervention by someone who could resolve the situation without triggering larger regional conflicts. Madison smiled, gathering her operational materials and preparing for deployment. The work continued, each mission an opportunity to prove that the most sophisticated problems could be solved by people who understood that creativity, intelligence, and unconventional thinking were more powerful than any traditional weapon. Outside her window, the flags of member nations flew in the autumn breeze, representing countries that had learned to trust in solutions that defied conventional military wisdom. Madison Torres had transformed from a dismissed recruit into the architect of a new approach to international security, proving that the most dangerous assumptions are the ones people make about what others cannot accomplish. The pen in her hand caught the late afternoon sunlight, a simple reminder that extraordinary results often come from ordinary tools in the hands of someone who refuses to be limited by what others consider possible. Her story had become proof that individual excellence, when guided by principles of protection and service, could change the world in ways that traditional approaches never could. As she prepared for her next mission, Madison knew that Master Chen had been right about the greatest victories being the ones no one knows happened. Around the world, people were living safely because of conflicts that had been prevented, crises that had been resolved, and threats that had been neutralized by operatives who understood that appearance could be the most powerful deception of all. The woman who had once been called too pretty for combat had become the architect of a new era in international peacekeeping, where the most effective warriors were the ones nobody saw coming. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.